Gonna move that. Good morning. Ooh, welcome to another Shamanic Coffee Hour. I'm gonna I'm gonna move this. Good morning. If you're just joining, I'm trying to get. I'm on two cameras, and I'm trying to get them so it doesn't look like I'm totally ignoring one, one over the other. So I've got one here, and I'm just making a little bit of an adjustment here. Good morning. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Happy Monday, everybody. If you're joining live, if you're watching the replay, I have no idea what day it is for you at this point, but good morning to you. Sun, star, and spirit. All of those things are fantastic. So good, great handle here. Yeah, good morning to everybody. Hope everybody had a good weekend. I had a pretty good weekend. It was, oh gosh, it was busy. So my daughter, I'm only saying this so everybody can keep their fingers crossed, send good thoughts. My daughter is taking her drive. Oh, good morning. Good morning. My daughter is taking her driving test this morning and very nervous about it, as one imagines. I can remember being nervous about taking my driver's test approximately 1 million years ago. Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you. Greetings to you. So anyway, she's very nervous. I spent a lot of time over the weekend practicing parallel parking, which is something I don't know if everywhere does that. I know driver's license tests vary from places to places. That's the hardest part of the test here. And who's good at, like, unless you live in a city where you parallel park pretty regularly, who's good at that? I'm pretty good at parallel parking. I lived in Boston for 20 years, so I parallel parked a whole lot. Um, but I live out in the country, and so it's not exactly parallel parking territory. Anyway, so good thoughts to my daughter Sophia this morning for a positive result. And of course, I've started talking, so Phoebe's going to come make herself known. Hey, Phoebe, my cat. Hi, Phoebes. She may make an appearance and she may not. We'll see. We'll see. Come on up. No? Okay. She's just going to meow at me. She's like the most vocal cat ever, or one of them. Although when I was little, my mom had a Siamese cat that was pretty darn vocal, as they can be. So what are we talking about this morning? We are talking about shamanism and the mystical path. So my two loves combined, my two spiritual loves combined. Here's Phoebes. Say hi. Say hello. Hi, Phoebe. Hello. Phoebe's a shaman cat. She always likes to get involved in these conversations and keep me on the right track. Thwap me in the face with her tail. Let's try not to thwap me in the face with the tail. Makes it hard to drink my coffee, and then I get your long cat hair in my coffee. So I'm going to talk about shamanism, particularly as a mystical path, and it doesn't have to be a mystical path. I'll briefly touch on what I mean by shamanism, what I mean by mysticism, and then I'm going to talk about how they overlap. But my two, I guess, great spiritual loves are shamanism and mysticism. Or we might say metaphysics, but certainly mystical metaphysics from that perspective. So, but what the heck am I talking about? Let's go into it a little bit. There's a lot of confusion about what the word shamanism means and where it comes from and all of that sort of thing. So I'm going to break down what I know about it. And I've done, over the past 10 years or so, I've done a significant amount of research into the origins of shamanism and even the word shamanism. So there are people out there, experts in shamanism, who will tell you that shamanism only refers to Siberian spiritual practice. That's it. From the Tungus tribe in Siberia. That's it. Nothing else is shamanism. That's one perspective. And that the word comes from the Tungus tribe. Again, that's one perspective. It's a limited perspective, and it ignores a lot of linguistic evidence. So the word shaman or shamanism came into English about 325 years ago. It was first written down in a book. Translated out of German, I believe, and it was written by a man who went on a diplomatic mission to Russia and wound up in Siberia and met people in the Tungus tribe, and they had these holy men called shamans, right? So that word came into English. It is a loan word in English, right? One could say, oh, it's not an English word. Well, you know, it's been in English for longer than many of the words that we have. And 80% of the English language are loan words. So if you were to eliminate all of the words that have origins that are not sort of Old English, Germanic words, that would be 80% of the language. Right. So I would have a very difficult time communicating with you and you understanding me at this point. I would be speaking something very close to Frisian if we eliminated all of the loan words in English. So shaman and shamanism are loan words in English, and they refer to yes, they have been applied by anthropologists and such to a broad spectrum of spiritual practices. And again, there are maybe one expert out there who are like, nope, there is no global shamanism. There's no universal shamanism. There's no practice that everybody around the world um, is practicing. That's just wrong. It's just wrong. I know somebody who is spent time in Mongolia or whatever and has proclaimed himself an expert and dumps on anybody else saying they practice shamanism. So just beware of stuff like that. Shamanism is not necessarily cultural appropriation. The way I practice shamanism is that I do not practice any very specific cultural rituals that do not pertain to cultures that I have a connection to or that have not been given to me and said it is okay for you to teach this practice. I would not teach Native American religious practices, for example. I am not Native American. I'm not indigenous. I'm not an indigenous person, and so I would not take those practices from somebody else and teach them. I have participated in ceremonies that I have been invited into. I've been in sweat lodges. I have participated in, I guess you would call it pipe ceremony, uh, by someone who is a pipe carrier. So somebody who has authority from some tribe to do pipe ceremony. I've done, and sweat lodge from somebody who has authority from somebody who's indigenous to do sweats. But sometimes people go a little crazy with the cultural appropriation thing. You can't say. I've been told you can't say smudge. You can't say the word smudge. I'm like, well, smudge is an English word, right? Like it is not an indigenous word. It's Old English. It's really old, right? It's been in English longer than the word shaman, longer than many of the words that we know. And the practice of burning herbs to purify a space or people or objects is pretty universal. It's pretty global, as is the practice of shamanism. So let me get into shamanism a little bit. So anyway, the word came into English from Russian and German, but originated from the Tungus people of Siberia. Now that word, I don't believe, cropped up out of nowhere. I don't believe that the Tungus people invented that word. There's evidence that word shaman or very close linguistic approximations of that exist in Sanskrit, for example, and Pali and Chinese and Akkadian. And so I think the practice and the word have roots that are prehistoric and we don't exactly know. And it appears that people have been practicing shamanism for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Now, we don't know if hello, welcome, welcome. Um, we don't know if, for example, people, you know, um, we don't know what words people were using. And lots of different cultures have their own words, of course, in their own languages for what we call shamanism or shaman or what have you. So there are people practicing what we would recognize as shamanism in the Americas, North America, South America, Central America, indigenous people, in uh, you know, in Asia, practicing what we consider shamanism in Africa. Basically, every continent, every place in the world, people are practicing. So, what do we mean by this? What do we mean by shamanism? And I promise I'm going to get to the mysticism aspect as well. So, shamanism is a practice in which somebody uses an altered state of consciousness. There's a very specific altered state of consciousness, usually, but somebody alters their consciousness. They are able to travel in spirit form, so outside of the body in spirit form. And they work with helping spirits. So they work with spirits, could be spirits of ancestors, spirits of animals, divine spirits, all, angels, whatever spirits. And shamanism always comes through a cultural lens, right? So if you are practicing on Mongolia or you are practicing in the Amazon basin, it's going to look differently. But there are enough things in common that anthropologists have said, we are going to place the word shamanism on this. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, we don't have a better word in English. We don't have a different word in English or different phrase. Good morning to you, my friend. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Hope everyone's getting their coffee on. I'm definitely caffeinating this morning. Long weekend of practicing driving with my daughter. By the way, if you missed it, is going for her driver's test in just an hour. So fingers crossed. It's a very stressful time for young people. You understand. Our daughters are in the same grade and in the same age, approximately the same age. I think my daughters may be a little bit younger. They're anyway. So anyway, so we don't have a different word than shamanism, and so a lot of people get recently, just very recently, people get really uptight about people using that word. I'm going to continue to use that word, just because unless somebody can, explain what all of the, have a common word for all of these cultures. Like, again, this word has been in English for over 300 years. So we don't have a better word for it. We don't have a different word for it. And there was shamanic practice in the areas from which, the British Isles, there was shamanic practice there, but it died out with the importation, I guess, for lack of a better term, or the exportation of Christianity. But even prior to that, so the Roman army came in. So the Druids were shamanic, for example. And the fact there are words in Irish. There's an Irish word, and I can't remember the name of it, for somebody who goes into a trance and just speaks poetry from the gods. That's what a shaman does, right? So there's linguistic evidence. There's written accounts of this happening. There's written accounts of the practice being outlawed. There's written accounts. So I study and practice Norse shamanism. So that was primarily practiced by women, but there were a few men who practiced it. And they're it's practice. It's they're going into it. It's called scythe or scythe or scythe, depending on the language. Uh, and it's spelled SEI, and it's that D, that T. It looks like a D, but it's actually a TH sound, scythe. It's the same letter in the name Odin, which is actually Odin. So anyway, so we see this practice. It's global. It has existed throughout time. It appears that human beings are uniquely wired to do this. So human beings can alter their state of consciousness. You do this when you go to sleep at night. You do this when you listen to music. You do this when you drink alcohol. You do this when take any sort of psychoactive substance. Marijuana is psychoactive. Psilocybin. So there are cultures, some cultures, not the majority, not all cultures, that practice what we call plant medicine. So they're using entheogens to alter the state of consciousness. So ayahuasca, psilocybin, peyote, cannabis in some cultures. There's lots of different cultures. Now the use of entheogens is ancient. And we see it. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for wishing good luck to my daughter. I really hope she does well. I'm, her dad, I'm pulling for her. I did call her this morning. She's at her mom's house right now, but she was on her way out the door to go practice before the test. So I did call her and teach her to, remind her, not teach her, I've taught her before how to do calming breaths. And I said, you've got this. You have all the knowledge you need. You have all the skills you need. It's just a matter of remaining calm enough in your body to do the test without making, without forgetting or. So I walked her through taking some calming breaths before the exam. So I feel like I've done all I can do. That's kind of what parents do, right? We feel like we do all we can do, and then we push the kids out the door. And then we pray for them and wish them well, give them good thoughts. So lots of cultures use these entheogens. That practice is super ancient. Oh my gosh, they're telling me, probably because I'm talking about the use of substances. TikTok is telling me that I'm saying things that are not age appropriate. I don't know what I said. Talking about it can't be about the driver's test, that's for sure. So anyway, that's one thing. Lots of cultures do that. The ancient Egyptians did that. The ancient Greeks did that. There's evidence. Early Christians, there's art from early Christianity that is like from the 2nd century. There's iconography where there is representation of psilocybin mushrooms in the religious art. There's I think it's a couple. I'm not sure, but there are researchers. There are religious researchers who wrote a book about that. Wrote a book about the appearance of psychedelic mushrooms in early Christian art, and it's probably true. So we often think of Christianity, early Christianity, as this like monoculture, this one culture that kind of took over the world. And that wasn't the case for a very long time, for hundreds of years. In the beginning of Christianity, there were many, many competing sects until, the government of Rome, Christianity became its official religion, and then it wiped out all of the other, what they considered heresies, heretical sects. Oh my gosh, there's a beautiful little finch singing on my porch right now. The cat is just staring at it, but it's just beautiful. Good morning to you. Oh, happy Monday to you too. Good morning. My coffee is extra amazing today. I definitely need it. I was up a little late last night too, but I'm kind of an early riser kind of person. But so anyway, that's sort of a broad overview of shamanism. So shamanism, altered state of consciousness, you've got to have that. If you don't have that, you're doing something else. You might call it shamanism, but I really think like that is the cornerstone. So a lot of my training is about um, how to enter into altered states, and I don't use entheogens. So I use drums. So rhythm is the most common way for people to enter into this, and you know this. You know this when you listen to music and it alters your state. It makes you happy, or it makes you sad, or it makes you feel love, or it makes you feel whatever. Music has a profound effect on our brains. And so shamans have a particular rhythm that they use, whatever the instrument, whether they're using drums or rattles or wind instruments like didgeridoo, or sticks that they click together, or other kinds of things, or singing or dance. And that's predominant. There was thought that like every culture was using entheogens at some point. And it is pretty widespread. We find evidence of it in everywhere, from like really ancient Vedic texts, to the Greek mystery schools, to ancient Egypt, uh, to the Arctic Circle. We find the use of mushrooms, for example, Amanita muscaria mushrooms. We find psilocybin mushrooms, peyote. There are peyote religions, ayahuasca. So there is that, but the most common way for shamans around the world to go into the correct state of consciousness is by using rhythm. And this is an important point. This altered state. So a lot of shamanic practice today, and throughout history, a lot of it was what I would consider sort of practical, tactical spirituality. What do I mean by that? So shamans were healers, and shamans are healers. First and foremost, you lived in a tribe. You didn't have a doctor or a psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist or whatever. So shamans were healers, and they were doing healing on multiple levels. So a shaman might be an herbologist as well, and might know which plants, but they're going to use the spiritual aspect of healing as well. So they're going to do this journey. They're going to use altered states of consciousness. They're going to alter your consciousness. They're going to work with your spirits. And if they use plants or whatever other substances, they're going to work with the spirit of those plants, which is what alchemists were doing. There's a branch of alchemy called spagyria. And spagyria is taking the spirit of plants, particularly for its medicinal values. And so they would take plants and put this through this whole alchemical extraction process, right? Where they would, extract this part of the plant using this process and this part, and then at the end combine them back in. So you had this spagyric herbal tincture. There are people who do spagyric herbology still today. There are people who do laboratory alchemy still today. Kind of interesting stuff. But spagyrics is fascinating, and there were people like Paracelsus, if you've heard that name before. Paracelsus was a famous physician and alchemist I think in Prague, around the early Renaissance period, who was a very successful healer, whose principles of healing actually still inform a lot of what we do today. So he came up with the phrase, "'Tis the dose that makes the poison," right? There's poison in everything. "'Tis the dose that makes the poison," meaning, like a little bit of medicine may be good for you, but you take too much of it and it's gonna, too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing, right? And he was murdered by his fellow physicians, I think, because he was too successful. That's the story anyway. But he was also an alchemist, and he was definitely practicing spagyrics and stuff like that. So somebody is asking, I go in hell. I roll my eyes uncontrollably and see reality very different in a bad way. I'm very sure this is a shamanic initiation. Can you help? So it might be a shamanic initiation, but I definitely don't like wouldn't do healing sessions over these lives because they're very public. But what I will say is, if you're having experiences like that, um, be and yes, they can be extremely frightening and extremely real and all of that, and there may be a spiritual cause to that, and it might be shamanic initiation, but 100% go to a physician and rule out or treat any organic causes of any problems such as this. If you are experiencing, um, you know, it's a little bit off topic for today's talk, but I do want to touch on it since you came in and commented. Um, I believe that people who are having what we would diagnose in the West as psychosis, psychotic breaks, meaning they have uh, things that are considered hallucinations and breaks from what most people would consider reality, are actually perceiving things on a spiritual level. It's just there's no control over it. So I've worked with people with schizophrenia and other kinds of things, and um, it is, they have input coming in that they don't have control over, and the mind, the consciousness, is trying to make sense of it, and so it's throwing up all of these images and experiences and things like that. But if your eyes are rolling into the back of your head, you're experiencing this hellish world and stuff, definitely seek out some help and get you know uh, get some diagnosis for that, because even though you can work spiritually, you also want to be tackling any organic issues as well. Yeah, it will definitely. Okay. Yeah. No. No schizophrenia. So definitely. I don't know. Yeah, I know what you're saying. A psychiatrist. Yeah. Um, but I would be curious, particularly with the eyes rolling back. That sounds like it's probably something organic, like and I don't know. I don't know enough of your history, and I'm not a medical professional, so I understand. It's very frightening. That sounds. It does sound horrifying. Um, but yeah, I mean, you could. But again, like I would people who come to me are having similar experiences, which is fairly often. Um, I always insist that they're working with a physician as well. So it would be irresponsible for me to not suggest that. So, for example, if somebody breaks their arm and comes to me, I would take them to the emergency room and get them, have a doctor look at them and get their bones set and put a cast on. And then I would work with them spiritually to help create spiritual conditions for them to heal as well. So, um, so understood. It does sound like a very frightening situation. So, um, so again, back to, let's talk about. So I just went through talking about shamanism. Let's talk about mysticism a little bit. And this word comes from the Greek. It's where we get the word mysteries, mysterious, and mystic really means, not in English, but the origins implies an initiation, a spiritual initiation. It implies, so the mystery schools were these schools in Egypt and in Greece where you would go. Most famous one was in Eleusis in Greece, and it lasted for over 1,000, actually a couple thousand years. So imagine like a church that's like 2,000 years old and continuously going, and tens of thousands of people every year are going to this on pilgrimage. And they, would go in, and the first time you went, you were uninitiated, and you would go through an initiation and have the initiatory experience, and then you would go back again, and you would be considered, I think the word was mysterion. So the second time you went through this initiation, you were a true initiate into the mysteries. And so what they would do is you would go in and you would drink this magical potion called kaikon, which was probably beer that was infested with ergot fungus, and ergot fungus is the basis of LSD. So they were tripping pretty heavily, and you would sit in the darkened temple, and there would be priests or holy people who would put on a play, essentially like a passion play. That's where we get that tradition in many religions, where they, put on religious plays going through stuff. And so people would have these profound life-changing experiences. The writings about it were they were communing with the gods and goddesses, right? So, ancient Greece was polytheistic, meaning they had many gods and goddesses. There's still polytheistic forms of spirituality today, but they were using, these entheogens to enter into a profound altered state and to commune with divinity. And so mysticism in English, I'm going to let you guys chat a little bit, but I don't want to get too far off topic here. And not to be, I don't want to come off as like unkind or insensitive, but I don't like in a public forum, I don't really handle like individual like cases sort of thing. So I don't want to go too far off topic, and I would want privacy for you if we were to work together. And I'm not saying that we would, but so I'm going to try to keep things a little bit on topic. I appreciate you coming here and seeking help. And I hope that you find something. So anyway, mysticism, how we define mysticism in the way that we use it in English, the way that it's used in sort of more modern spiritual context, is that mystics are people who seek to become closer to divinity, who seek to elevate their consciousness, or through different means, prayer, meditation, whatever. There are different mystical paths. Oh, it's not, no worries. I just don't, I don't think it's, I definitely appreciate people coming in here and asking questions or asking for help and that sort of thing. But I can't diagnose or do anything like that on these lives. And they're going out to a very wide group of people, like multiple channels and all of that sort of thing. So I try to keep it topical and, and also, like, I think if people are seeking help, like, there is a certain amount of privacy that should be involved there as well. So, but I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're going through, and I know that it's I know that it's extremely frightening, and I understand that. But again, disclaimer: absolutely rule out every single potential medical cause before you jump to the conclusion that it's something else, because it probably is. There's spiritual and physical components to just about everything. So you're very welcome. So back to mysticism. So there's mysticism in just about every form of spirituality. There is Christian mysticism. You can read writings by Christian mystics. There's Christian mystics today. There is mysticism in Islam. The Sufi order, for example, is an Islamic order, and their practices are decidedly mystic. There was a great, I wish I could remember where this article was. It might have been in like a National Geographic or something like that. And there was a story about Sufis. And if you've ever seen, if you don't know, there are different sects of Sufism as well, but there are some sects that dance. These are the guys that are wearing like the big skirts that spin. You see them spinning around. They were at one point called whirling dervishes. I have no idea if that's a proper term of any kind, and so I don't want to use it, but they're Sufis, and they dance. And the poet Rumi, if you've ever read any of his stuff, which is mind-blowingly deep, complex. He's writing on a surface level. He's writing very often love poetry, but it's love poetry to the divine. When he's talking about his beloved, seeking his beloved, he's talking about God. He's talking about the divine. He's talking about source. So Sufism, and so Rumi was a Sufi, and somebody who lived in a Sufi order told me one time that Rumi was actually a dancer, and that he would dance, and so these Sufis will dance and enter into the altered state to raise their consciousness. It's beautiful. And so somebody told me that Rumi was a dancer who actually would dance himself into an altered state and then recite the poetry. Like he would get inspired. That's a great word. Inspired. That means in, and spiros, which or spiratus, which is spirit, but also means breath. It's like the breath of God coming into one. I'll talk about the breath of God someday, or breath of gods, or whatever. There's a lot of cross-cultural stuff there, right? Even the Norse had the breath of Odin, the Ond, that breathed life into the first man and first woman. In Christianity, of course, and Judaism, they have Adam and Eve. In ancient Norse belief, they have Ask and Embla, and they were trees. They were made out of trees, the first man and the first woman. An ash tree and an elm tree, to be specific. So this dancer that they interviewed, this Sufi dancer, they asked him what it was like when he was dancing, and he said, "I feel like I'm being lifted up by angels." And I said, "What a beautiful and poetic expression!" And like, I get it. Cool. Yeah, I will do an episode on that, on breath and spirit, and how closely they're linked, right? I mean, and we can kind of understand why, because when you stop breathing, the body is deceased. We call that we're expired. We have expired. We have breathed. Like I know the food in my fridge, half of it is expired, right? But it means the breath has left. Out of breath. You are out of breath. So we use that for, it's more of an older term. He has expired. We don't use that too much for when somebody dies these days, but that is an expression in English, right? And it means the breath has left. The breath has gone. Sorry, Phoebe really wants to thump me in the face with her tail. You want to say hi again? Say hello. This is Phoebe the cat. She is insistent upon being petted whenever I give these lives. So let's get back to mysticism and the breath, and well, not just the breath, but so the Sufi dancer describes. So we have mysticism in the three major Abrahamic religions. So Christianity, Judaism. In Judaism, it's called Kabbalah, and in Islam, we have Sufism, and there are mystical Christian sects. And I am as of very recently been ordained as a minister in a metaphysical ministry. So it is ostensibly Christian, but not very much. So I don't particularly identify as a Christian, although I have respect everybody's belief and religion. But it's I think there are metaphysical teachings there that are as there are in every system of belief. There are metaphysical teachings that hold truths for me. You just have to look underneath. So a lot of in the West, a lot of mystical teaching is what we call esoteric, meaning it is given only to an inner circle. In Judaism, traditionally, you could only study Kabbalah if you were a man. You had to be over 40 years old, and your children had to have left the house. At that point, you could begin the study. Nowadays, you can take courses, you can read books. There's a lot of stuff about, is the Kabbalah that's taught today the real thing? Or there's, and people took parts of it out and teach it. I won't go too far down that path, but just traditionally in Judaism, if you wanted to study Kabbalah, you had to be male, you had to be over 40, your kids. So it was a very inner teaching thing, not revealed to the masses. That is what we call exoteric, outside the circle, right? Esoteric means inside the circle, exoteric means outside the circle. And even in the Bible, when the apostles asked Jesus, why do you teach in parables? Because Jesus taught through parables, right? He taught through stories. A lot of the Bible is parables, but there are people who want to take everything as literal history, and it's such a limited reading, and kind of misses the point, unfortunately. But and he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, he basically said, look, I give teachings on two levels, right? There's teachings for you, the apostles, the inner circle, because you guys have secret knowledge, you guys can understand this stuff. But I'm also teaching the masses, and when they're ready for the inside stuff, I'll give it to them. So there's sort of this two-tiered teaching, and unfortunately, most of what everybody knows about every religion and form of spirituality out there is exoteric, right? There's a lot of stuff missed until there was a movement in the U.S. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, called the New Thought movement, which was ostensibly Christian, and a lot of traditions, a lot of more mystical traditions came out of that. So Christian Science, the unity teachings of Fillmore, the Fillmores, husband and wife. I don't want to say theosophy. That's not right. Theosophy is a whole other different thing. But anyway, so there are mystical, and so in the East, for example, mysticism is tied very heavily in a lot of. It's not as hidden away. It's not as esoteric. So you have, you can go practice yoga, for example, as a mystic practice. Rudolf Steiner, yeah. The cat had to make, yeah. She's curled up and sleeping. 10 seconds ago, she was demanding attention. That's cats for you, right? Rudolf Steiner, yes, yep. And there are lots of transpersonal schools as well. There's great, what is it? I'm trying to remember. There's a psychoanalytic school that's really good as well. That's not quite Freudian and not quite, it's definitely not Freudian and not quite Jungian either. There's another psychoanalytic school that borrows actually from the Essenes, which were a mystical sect in ancient Judea. So in the East, you've got Taoist practice, lots of mystical practice, lots of magical practice. There's really, really fascinating stuff. We don't know a whole lot about Taoism in the West. What we know about it is what they call canonical Taoism, meaning there were books that were published, ancient books like the Tao Te Ching that were published, that were sort of officially recognized by the Chinese government and then translated by scholars into English and other languages. And that's what we kind of know about it. But Taoism incorporates, there are monastics, there are people who live in monasteries and practice very mystical traditions. And you hear about these guys living to be like 120, 130 years old. They're doing a lot of health practices, they're doing a lot of immortality practices. There are schools, I know primarily because of a background in martial arts, there are Taoist schools of martial arts, right? So a lot of people think about, Buddhist schools because we know of like the Shaolin Temple from the Kung Fu um, TV shows and movies. But there are things like internal schools like Bagua, Tai Chi is very much a Taoist martial art, or at least very influenced by Taoism. There's another one called Xingyi. So Tai Chi, most people know Tai Chi, slow movements, that sort of thing. But there are many forms and many forms of meditation, qigong, neigong, um, lots of internal energy work, and it's not there. Yeah, there are esoteric teachings. There are teachings that you'd have to become a monastic or be adopted into a specific family to learn. But there are a lot more mystical teachings that are just out in the open that you can just go. Now, the Chinese government, the Chinese communist government has outlawed a lot of things, including some forms of qigong, including any kind of fortune telling is illegal. You can be jailed or fined for doing any sort of fortune telling. So that I Ching was used for fortune telling for thousands of years. The different forms of what we would consider magic, I guess. So any sort of like spell work, that sort of thing, outlawed by the Chinese government. So you would, it doesn't, it's not to say it doesn't exist. It's sort of like we outlawed, in the US, we outlawed, believe it or not, we outlawed native tribes from doing, there's something called the ghost dance, and we outlawed it, you know? So um, so we've done that. We've done it. Do I believe native shamans knew similar knowledge as esoteric schools? Schools obviously can pass down lots of information. I'm assuming native shamans didn't have as much access to other shamans. And so, as a follow up to that, are native shamans able to access information organically? Yes. So, in my experience, and from looking at anthropological evidence, even cultures that are disparate, so cultures in the Americas, for example, cultures in Australia, for example, cultures in Africa, um, appear to have overlapping knowledge of spiritual topics. Now, these are cultures that haven't been in contact for at least tens of thousands of years, and so lots of stuff has gone on. And cultures that don't have what we don't have written language, so things weren't passed around in books or whatever. We see the same motifs being, and in Europe, we see the same motifs being painted or carved or whatever into rock art that we can date to tens of thousands of years ago. So, do they have similar knowledge to esoteric schools? I do. I don't want to be. I don't want to be ethnocentric. I will say that every spiritual school of thought arose in a context of culture and geography, right? So, you would have the mystery schools of Egypt, and and you would have the shamans in South America. Now, they're both very interested in things like fertility, right? Like planting crops and having, if they had livestock, having livestock, and that's really very interested in fertility. But the culture and the land would dictate in a way how that manifested. right? So if you're living in Egypt, your agriculture is dependent upon the inundation and recession of the Nile River. Not the same in the Amazon, right? Amazon's a rainforest. It's a completely different environment. And so I believe so shamanism is what we call a path of direct revelation. So shamans, or somebody practicing something shamanistic or whatever, have access to unlimited, what we would consider spiritual information. You're plugging into source. And this is where the mysticism comes in. You have the ability to plug into source. You're viewing that through a cultural lens. We cannot experience the world in a way that really, it's hard to step outside of our conditioning, the conditioning that comes from our ethnicity, the family group that we grew up in, the culture that we are surrounded by and infused in, the landscape that we live in. All of those things impress upon us filters through which we experience information. Now, if I'm living in Egypt, for example, and I have experienced lions, right, that were imported, because I don't think lions are native to Egypt, but they had lions, and other animal, hippopotamuses and crocodiles. Okay, we'll say crocodiles, right? So I see a Nile croc. I know what Nile crocodiles are, and then I'm picked up and transplanted magically to Florida, and there are alligators there. Well, they're close enough that I know that these are dangerous, right? Or even like a lion and a jaguar. I can understand that these are both felines and that they're dangerous, but I don't have a context. I don't have the name of that thing, and so I might apply, like I might call it something different. I might say, oh, this is a black maneless lion or something along those lines. But that's what we do. That's how we apply our cultural filters onto things. Um, but as far as interchange, so part of your question is about interchange between shamans. Like, do uh, indigenous shamans have access to other shamans? There was certainly exchange, right? There were exchange between people, between tribes, and in fact, the word shaman might have entered into the Tongsic language in Siberia because there were Lamaistic Buddhists who were traveling through that region. And the word shaman means Buddhist monk, right? So they might have said, oh, so again, this is where cultural overlay comes in, right? So um, uh, somebody comes through, we see this is a revered holy man. We have a revered holy man. They call him, the word's actually Saman. Saman, so we adopt that word. Oh, this is our Saman. This is our shaman, right? They're the same. They're the same thing, even though one is Buddhist and one is not Buddhist. In Pali, shaman means Buddhist monk. In Sanskrit, it means monk as well, like holy person. So the word, and so they will say, oh, the word is tungsik and it means to boil, right? Because the shamans would get entranced and go into like almost like a boiling rage, not a rage, but like a boiling state, an ecstatic state. They would go into this ecstatic state that would be considered boiling. Yeah, maybe, but it is weird to me, and it does not seem coincidental that this word appears in all of these different languages in a very similar region of the world, and has very similar meaning. it is a spiritual functionary, basically, is a title of a specific spiritual functionary. But in English, we use it in a different way. So, yeah, so, you know, and as far as native shamans being able to access information organically, it never ceases to amaze me the amount of information and wisdom that tribal cultures had to survive in incredibly harsh conditions, right? Um, oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining. Yeah, I'm very, very happy to. Um, so, for example, many people are familiar with ayahuasca. So, ayahuasca is a entheogenic brew that is consumed now everywhere, but it comes from the Amazon basin, right? And there are other words for it as well. I think yahe, and some other words, but we know it as ayahuasca, right? And there is an ayahuasca vine, and so they cut this vine down, but they have to mix it with a bunch of other plants, and then it's boiled into this brew over a period of time. Now, in the brew, in the tea, it's a we can call it a tea that you drink. The ayahuasca, the chemical in there that is psychoactive is called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. That is the most powerful hallucinogen we know of. Incredibly powerful. People, I have never tried ayahuasca, don't know if I would, but people have tried it, have profound experiences, frightening experiences. It also makes you purge gives you vomiting and diarrhea. Almost instantaneously. It is a purgative, but people have these like profoundly altering experiences. Now, the interesting thing about DMT is that you can eat DMT till the cows come home, and it will not enter into your bloodstream. You can drink, eat DMT, it won't. Your stomach acid neutralizes DMT. So here's the thing. The ayahuasca vine, I forget the scientific name for it, the vine that they actually call ayahuasca does not contain enough DMT. So they use other plants that contain DMT. But if it was just the other plants that contain DMT, there would be no effect on you. You could drink, it might make you throw up and have diarrhea, but you're not going to have this psychological effect from it. You're not going to have the hallucinatory effect. So, but the ayahuasca vine, what it contains is what they call a MOAI. I'm gonna lose the name of this. It's like slipping out of my brain. But an MAOI, an inhibitor, it inhibits the acid in your stomach from breaking down the DMT. Now, this is significant pharmacological, like how. Yes, I know those tribes have been there for tens of thousands of years, but how did they figure out exactly the right combination of stuff and how to prepare it with no laboratory equipment, no knowledge of modern chemistry, no, whatever, you eat the wrong thing, you take the wrong vine, you prepare it wrong, you die, you're dead, right? How did they come up with this brew that requires very careful combination of very specific materials? Otherwise, it would either A, have no effect, or B, kill you. And the answer to that, my belief is that it is inspired action. It is inspired knowledge. They have access to the spirits of the plants through shamanistic technique, through shamanistic method. They are able to contact spirits and get information. So do shamans access information organically? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can tell a lot of stories, but I'm very careful about anything that sounds like I'm bragging. And so I'll give you one story. And this is like, I want to be very careful and say that I'm not taking credit for this. I was just an intermediary in this process. Um, Anything that I get, any information, I'm not particularly psychic or clairvoyant or any of that. Any information that I get is coming from spirit, and that's how I work shamanically, right? So a few years back, and I have a lot of stories like this, but again, it's like trying not to. I don't want to come across as like I'm bragging. Hubris is really, really bad in spirituality, right? Like thinking you're some big wizard or something is not is like a bad place to be. Look at this. I got my coffee carafe out to keep my coffee hot. Gonna warm it up. By the way, this was a great investment. We can have hot coffee throughout this whole thing. So a few years back, a friend contacted me, and she lives in or lived at that time in a city in Sweden. I've never been to Sweden. I've never seen the city. Maybe I've seen pictures of the city, but I don't actively recall. But I've never looked at a map of the city. And she asked me to do some work for her. She was looking for a couple of things. She was looking for a new place to live and a new job. She wasn't happy in her job, and she was living in an apartment in the city. And there were problems like mold and mice or something like that, and she had to get out, just having allergy issues. So she needed some help sort of understanding where to look. And I said, I'll do some work for you. So I did some journey work for her, and the first thing I got was I kept seeing a red farmhouse out in the middle of the country. I'm seeing a red farmhouse. And so that was the first thing. And then the second thing was I got a view of this city in Sweden, Malmo, Sweden. And I like, it was vivid enough that I could draw a map. And I did actually draw a map. And I said, there's an official building here, and to the east of that there's a river, and to the south of that there's a fountain, and there's a cobblestones here, and there's an old part of the city here, and there's a new part of the city here, and then over here there's a building where there's a modern office building, and on a floor above the third floor there's a place where you might find some work. And I could draw everything, and I could see it. And this again, I'm not taking credit for this. This is information coming from spirit. I'm just relaying it. And so I sent off an email to my friend with all of this information. And she's like, well, I don't know what the red farmhouse means, but I live in the city, and I said, well, I don't know. I'm just telling you what I saw. I'm not interpreting it. I'm not, I'm just relaying the information that spirit showed me. But I did get the city down exactly, and I did locate where she found her next job. About 2 months later, she emails me, and there's a photo attachment, and she said, I just moved, and I want to show you, this is a picture of me looking out my living room window. And looking out her living room window was a red farmhouse, the same red farmhouse that I had seen in my journey a couple months before. She had moved to the country and was renting a guest house on somebody's farm, and the farmhouse was the red farmhouse that I saw. And I can tell you that it was exactly as I pictured it in my journey. So yes, people practicing shamanism correctly can access all kinds of information. It's coming from source. It's coming from spirit. And so in shamanism, we work with all kinds of helping spirits, right? We have power animals and upper world helping spirits and ancestral helping spirits and weather helping spirits and planetary helping spirits. But where shamanism and mysticism, I think, really overlap is when we go even beyond that, and we start using the shamanistic state, the shamanic state of consciousness, to start to get in touch with our own divine nature, which is the spark of source, the spark of God or divinity, whatever term you want to use. I like the word source. The word God has frequently a lot of baggage for people. So I'll, frequently use the word source or divinity, right? This spark of the divine that is, we can visualize it as within us, but we're actually within it. um, like imagine a part of you that is outside of the universe. Like you can't, right? You're within, surrounded by, and suffused with this, with everything there is. And while we perceive differences, right? Even like as I hold my coffee cup, the cloud of atoms that I visualize as my hand, that I imagine as my hand, is not a solid thing. It's a cloud of probability. It's a cloud of waves becoming particles, becoming waves in probability, as is this coffee and the coffee in the cup. And while I'm sitting here, particles are actually being exchanged between these things. Like I see them as separate, but they're not really. And ultimately, every particle in here, every particle in my hand, every bit of my consciousness comes from one source. And so we can use shamanic tools. This is where I really get down to shamanism and mysticism on the same path. I can use shamanic tools to kind of walk my way back. So in Kabbalah, you'd be walking your way up the tree of life to get to the top, to reunite your consciousness with divinity. I liked the view of going inward, but any direction that we view is just a metaphor. So whether you view it as going up, or you view it as going down into the earth, or you view it going inward, or you view it as expanding your consciousness outward, direction is a metaphor. It's an illusion. It's a way to wrap consciousness, our limited, individuated human consciousness. But we have another consciousness. This individuated, this is like our individual consciousness is like this little bubble that we've formed, that we've organized some consciousness around, around having this body and this mind. But ultimately, it's not who we are. Who we are is pure source. We just form in these individuals so that as part of source, we can have experiences. And that's our whole purpose. Our whole purpose is to have experiences. And we put labels on these experiences. We say, this is a good experience. This is a bad experience. This is pleasant. This is unpleasant. This is whatever. This is whatever. But there are practices, particularly in like Dzogchen in Buddhism, where one takes on observer position without judgment, without attachment or aversion, meaning we stop judging experience. It's a whole meditative practice around that, where we stop placing labels on things. This is good, this is bad, this is you, this is me. And we just allow whatever is occurring in our experience to occur without wanting to push it away or cling to it. And I can tell you that that is a beautiful space to be in. It's so relaxing. We are often fighting with the world. We do it so much, we're not even conscious of it most of the time, right? How often do we encounter things that we wish were different? And I'm not saying it's wrong to change things that are making your life uncomfortable, making your individualized consciousness uncomfortable, that are injustices. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is you spend some time sitting and allowing, sit and allow. This was a big lesson for me in my healing journey when I was working through some very severe PTSD in my healing journey. There were moments in my life where mere existence was torture. It was just absolute torture. And what I learned was that the torture came from me resisting what was going on. So I would be in the midst of a deep depressive episode and I would be fighting with it. I'm like fighting to try to get out of it. And really what I was doing was causing myself more misery and holding that depression in place and that sort of thing. Instead of using jujitsu, right? Jujitsu, if you don't know, is a martial art. It's my martial art. That's my teaching license in jujitsu right there behind us, with the seal of my school and all that. Jujitsu is a martial art that takes your opponent. It's the art of yielding, and it's taking your opponent's energy and redirecting it, as opposed to there's no direct resistance, right? We don't, you know, we're not doing that. We're not punching somebody's fist, right? There's very direct resistance. We are absorbing, allowing, right? And so I should have taken a lesson from that, but I'm thick. What can I say? And so there is a time to sit with and accept whatever is going on for you. That includes what things that feel internal, like emotion, fear, body feelings. Sit with that pain. Oh my gosh, off and on I have lived with chronic pain practically my whole life. So I was born with birth defects. I had an amputation when I was 18 months old. Um, and my body doesn't always cooperate. And so there are times where sometimes for months on end, I will not be pain free. And one of the ways that I learned to handle that without losing my marbles, because pain can do that. And I feel for anybody with chronic pain. It's not just says, oh, my back hurts or my hip hurts or whatever. It eats away at you. It can cause what we call soul loss in shamanism, like where it like takes part of your energy away. But I learned to go into it. I learned to mentally, with my awareness, go deep into the pain and really, really experience it. Sounds excruciating, but it's actually not. Approach it with curiosity. Try to find the center of it and the boundaries of it, and really, really go into it. And in that way, even physical pain can become spiritually transformative. I'm not recommending going out and causing yourself pain or ignoring pain signals in your body. That would be irresponsible of me. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that despite medical intervention, I was experiencing chronic pain. And did I want to go on potentially addictive drugs to get away from that? No, I did not. So I didn't. And so I didn't, for a very, very long time, I never took any drug whatsoever. Didn't drink, didn't take ibuprofen, didn't take allergy medication. Nowadays, I'm a little more measured. I'll have a cocktail now and then. If my allergies really are preventing me from doing some work, I will take allergy medication. I don't do it every day. And I'll take an ibuprofen once in a while, but I didn't for the longest time. And then I really went into the pain deeply. And then I learned to do the same thing with emotional pain as well. And it's profound. There's profound depth there. And at the center of it all, it may be hard to grasp this because it was for me in the beginning. At the center of it all is like this endless field of love energy, even underneath the pain, even underneath emotional pain and anxiety and whatever else we have going on for us. Our core is this endless ocean of deep love, which is just holding and comforting and beautiful. The Sanskrit phrase is Sat Chitananda, Sat, S-A-T, Chit, C-H-I-T, Ananda, A-N-A-N-D-A. It's actually 3 words, but it's combined into sort of one term. Sat Chit Ananda means consciousness, existence, and bliss, and is that state that you can enter into when you travel inward and find that ocean of love that is the center of you. It's not just the center of you, it's the center of all there is. Right? And you're no less a part of that than any saint, angel, god or goddess, shaman, priest, whatever. You are no less a part of that. You're no less, period. That's it. You're no less than anything. You are it. You are the universe. You are love. You don't have love. You don't feel, you might feel love. You might have love. You are love at your core, at your depth. And so for me, shamanism is my path. Shamanism is my path into love. And that's where shamanism and mysticism overlap for me. It might be very different than you. Oh, I'm glad. Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind. Shamanism just happens to be the way that I find that. It might be different from you. I mean, I practice other things as well. I meditate every single day, and I practice very specific forms of meditation, and I change it up from time to time as well, because I have ADHD, and I have to make things fresh. But you can, you don't need anything. It's weird for me to say that as a spiritual teacher. People can come to me and learn things. I hope, if they don't learn anything from me, then I'm not their teacher. But you have it all already, right? The phrase that people say in yoga class, namaste. It's like, hey, how's it going? Namaste. It means the enlightened part of me recognizes the enlightened part of you. That part of me that's divine recognizes that part of you that's divine, right? It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful phrase. We should, practice that. Practice recognizing the divinity in everyone you come into contact with. And that includes the people who drive you crazy. That includes the people who are awful to you. That includes the people who may have abused you in the past. That includes people who do things that horrify us. That is ego, all of that stuff, hurting other people, whatever. That is not what we are underneath all of this surface of this body and this mind. This body and mind is going to die someday. And I don't know what day that is. And if somebody offered me the opportunity to know what day that is, I would say no. I don't want to know. I want to live like tomorrow might be my last day. And so how would you live if tomorrow might be your last day? How loving would you become? How much would you love yourself? How much would you love your loved ones? How much would you love your fellow person if you knew none of this stuff mattered, because tomorrow was going to be your last day on earth in this body and mind? How would that change how you approach things? That's one way to look at it. So maybe I got to figure out how to do this, but not as one of these lives, but maybe I'll do some guided meditations through this channel, and we can, people who are interested can come in. I've done it before. I did in the beginning of the pandemic. I did for a couple months. I did meditations every day with people over Zoom, and anybody could just join in. So maybe I'll start doing something like that again. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what format that will take and how it'll go out. But I have talked way too long, like 20 minutes over time. I got to run, but thank you all so much for joining me again today. I mean this when I say this. I love you all. Find the love that you are inside. That's my word for today. And with that, I will leave you. Enjoy your Monday. Enjoy the rest of your week. I will talk to you again sometime this week. I'm not exactly sure when. Maybe Wednesday and Friday, or maybe just Friday. But oh, you are so welcome. You are so welcome. You are so welcome. Thanks for joining. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Talk to you all soon.